I call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, August 11, 2022. All managers are present. Is there any member of the public? No. Then I need a motion to approve the agenda. There will, however, be one amendment. I'll just say this. Under 13, just say at the second line, and referred by the president, by board president, to the appropriate committee. And with that slight language change, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Maxwell. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you to staff for two informational items that are included in our packet, the second quarter financial report and the final draft budget. And then moving to the consent agenda, I want to take number 5 off and move it to 11.4. And is there anything other changes to consent agenda? Then is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Sando.
Manager Hitchmati seconds. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I did attend last week the meeting of the Carver County Commission. Manager Olson spoke and introduced Mr. Whisker, who gave a good update to the board, and also Mr. Heyman and Mr. Mock were there. But I wanted to just turn it over to Manager Olson for the report.
Thank you, President White. We had a good meeting. We had an opportunity to present to the Carver County Commissioners the brief history of the watershed, as there are several commissioners that are new there. We also reviewed and then updated where we are in current projects and talked to them about the schedule of what we're going to be doing this fall out there. And then summarized additional projects we have planned for the next 5 to 10 years out in that neck of the woods. And then there was questions on the commissioner's part of what role they would be expected to play, or in other words, what is the ask? And at the time we said we've already received the ask from them in their financial willingness to financially support those projects. So it was more of a courtesy update, and described by one of the board members as a love fest. So we had a lot of support, a lot of indication that they're very pleased with our relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. Manager Loftus, Operations and Programs Committee meeting report.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I believe all the same stakeholders attended the meeting, but for the general public's information, we met about 325 Blake Road and had a 90% design briefing by Mr. Sherman and our landscape design HDR. We went through an update from 60% to 90%, discussed funding and partner agreements quickly. It was so engrossing. We were starting our meeting a little bit late. Sorry about that. Next action items are 90% design will come to the board in September, hopefully final design in October, and then potential construction starting in spring or summer of 2023, depending on a number of factors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was an interesting meeting. The upcoming meetings are printed in the agenda. Once again, a reminder that we're meeting on Monday, the week on August 22nd. And the Citizens Advisory Committee meets September 14th. Manager Sando is a liaison. Otherwise, going into September, it's the normal schedule. We'll move to item 11.1, Resolution 22044, Ms. Westerland.
Good evening, President White and Board of Managers. Before the board this evening is a request for action to authorize the administrator to execute a contract amendment for permitting program alignment, engineering, and legal services. The scope of the permitting program alignment project is to revise our rules and compliance framework with the goal of simplifying, streamlining regulations, excuse me, and aligning with the district's strategy of partnering with the land use community to build a balanced urban ecology. Sorry, my mouse is lost. I'm not quite used to, I believe it's on that screen. Okay, sorry about that. I'm just gonna start this slide over. Pardon me, I'm a little nervous. It's my first board presentation. As I was saying, the scope of the permitting program alignment project is to revise our rules and compliance framework with the goal of simplifying and streamlining our regulations and aligning with the district's strategy of partnering with the land use community to build a balanced urban ecology. In September 2019, the board authorized staff to enter contracts with Smith Partners and Stantec for support in this work. Since the contract's adoption, staff have been working through the scope of work, starting with developing policy direction with the CAC and Board of Managers, drafting revised rules and revised compliance framework, aligning with the state's MS4 permit, and moving toward engagement of the TAC, developing a sonar, and publishing the rules for a required public comment period. So that is a general overview of what this project scope is, and I'm going to move into what we have accomplished thus far and where we're projected to go this year and beyond. So, of the total scope of the project, we have completed the above section of this slide. We have set a policy direction, fully completed drafts of the erosion control, dredging, illicit discharge, appropriations, and floodplain rules, and partially completed drafts that are on their way to being finalized for shoreline stabilization, wetland protection, stormwater, water body crossing rules, and the compliance framework. And we've also completed preparation to engage stakeholders this fall. To finish the permitting alignment project, we need to look at this second section of work. So we still need to complete drafts of the procedural variance, definitions, and financial assurance rules, as well as engage the TAC starting this fall and process comments and make needed revisions that come out of that process. We also need to finalize guidance documents, draft a sonar, publish rules for public comment period, update miscellaneous SOPs, and develop a framework for coordinating regulatory partnership with municipalities. Our original contract amount achieved the first section of the project that I outlined. The reason that we have not completed all of the work with the original contract amount is multifaceted. So this was an inherited project. We've had transition in permitting staff, including myself, and that has led to significant time and resources up front spent transitioning, getting staff up to speed, setting direction, and getting clear on our process and scope. When Abigail Ernst took over the project in fall of 2021, she re-baselined our project and met with the board and the CAC so we were all on the same page moving forward. And she created an efficient and clear process that provided forward momentum to the project, which we have seen this year as we are on schedule and on track to meet our goal of finishing drafts and engaging with the TAC this fall and winter. Based on that remaining work, which I just outlined, still needing to be complete, so that again includes, the compliance framework and rule revision process with the TAC, the associated public comment and rule adoption process. Staff recommends that the Board of Managers authorize a contract amendment in the total amount of $72,250.50. Then the breakdown of how that's broken down between Stantec and Smith Partners is on the screen. And I can linger longer on the numbers if we have specific questions about the estimates or contracts that were provided by Stantec or Smith Partners, or else I will move into the Q&A.
Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2244?
So move approval.
I'll take a motion from Manager Olson and a second from Manager Miller. Are there questions for Ms. Westerland? I don't think so. Manager's office.
One of the deliverables is a standard operating procedure. Is you're writing staff duties, or is it literally just the checklists and the forms? I mean, those are
Yeah.
specifics. Those aren't an operating procedure. An SOP.
Right.
I mean,
A lot
are
of that
they
is
doing SOPs, or are they doing
Mhm.
forms and checklists?
Forms and checklists and internal documents. So a lot of that will be internal drafting work with some input from our legal consultant. So those would be internal forms and documents.
For internal staff to follow
Absolutely, yes.
when they are doing what? Enforcing issues, or what are the SOPs for?
That is mostly for the compliance framework, which is
Okay.
everything from our financial assurances. So when someone comes to us for a surety return, what is the process that we go through? So a checklist for staff, as well as a form we would send to the permittee. But that also, like you said, that's just one little piece. So throughout the compliance framework portion, there would be,
And that's something the
Drafts.
engineer or attorney would have knowledge of versus our staff would have knowledge of?
it's mostly guided internally. I have drafted one for the financial assurance already. And I did lean heavily on Chuck, our legal consultant from Smith Partners, for some insight because he's so familiar with our process. But a lot of that was internally guided and drafted.
Okay, because I could see that would be difficult for your consultant to write that for you.
Right.
That would have to be somewhat done internally, but.
Yes, and the remaining work does include internal pieces as well. So this is kind of encompassing all the work to be done. So not everything on this list is 100% driven by our consultants.
Okay. Next time we have an item like this, would you mind adding the action item from 2019? I could have
sure.
gone back probably and searched it online, but it would have been nice to know what we thought were the deliverables for the 72,000 in 2019, so that I understand the reason.
Right.
There was a lot of turnover, but at some point too, I expect our consultants to say, hey, we're not gonna hit these deliverables because of this. And when do they stop that? You know,
Right.
I don't know how far along we got in whatever our 2019 scope was, but, you know, turnover happens, but
Right.
somehow we still managed to spend that money. So it would be helpful if we're referencing a 2019 project to actually just
Dig into that
Just
scope
attach,
from
no, just
2019.
attach it.
Oh,
in
attach
the-
it to the document.
The
Got it.
packet item, so that I have an idea of what it was and what we thought we were doing. I should be able to
Yeah.
remember 2 years ago, but I do not.
And
I don't remember 3 years ago. See, even that, right? So if
yeah,
that would be helpful for me to just have that background information versus thinking about digging it up, not digging it up, and having to ask you about it.
that's a really helpful note.
So
Is there
thank you.
anything about the 2019 contract I could try to answer now, or else I
Well,
could?
I would love to know
definitely
what
have
the
it
scope of
available.
work
so I could
said.
send it.
What the deliverables were gonna be for that original $72,000, $78,000, and how much of that we accomplished. Did we get through most of it? Did we get through half of it? Did we churn 35 grand in turnover, catch-up costs?
Right.
Was it, I don't know. I know where we're at right now, but,
I could throw out just my understanding of what we've completed based on that scope. I have read it line by line. It was quite lengthy.
okay.
The buckets of work that were outlined in the 2019 and even the 2021 amendment are different than the more streamlined process that we've been running since Abigail Ernst introduced it. So it's a little bit difficult to compare, but we are at about 60% completion of the rule revision part and about 80% complete of the compliance framework portion. And the scopes of work that we included on this resolution are a lot easier to track and follow the buckets of work that Stantec and Smith Partners are helping us with. I would say that the scope from 2019, based on my review of it, has those same buckets of work represented, but in more line items, I guess. So, and not a lot of work was done tracking it per line item in the scope, but that's something we're working on doing moving forward.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that you've looked into it in detail. So, thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Great. Thank you. Anything else for Ms. Westland? Then, all those in favor of adopting the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
We have approved that. Next, we'll go to Resolution 2250, Mr. Sherman.
You know, when you call on him, it's gonna cost us money.
When I call on
Every-
Mr.
Mr.
Sherman,
Sherman?
Every time he makes a presentation, it's a big
he asks us to spend money. Okay, got it.
Well, you've anticipated my last slide. Good evening, President White and Board of Managers. I am here this evening with Resolution 22-50, authorization to proceed with the Greenway to Cedar Trail connection and stream bank restoration feasibility. So this is a pretty brief item, thankfully, compared to my last one. I'm going to give a little bit of project overview. This project dates back several years, and I believe several board managers are new since then. So just provide a little bit of context for the project. And then go over the scope of work and budget, and provide sort of a rough schedule and next steps before getting to any board discussion and action on the resolution. So this project is, a direct neighbor to 325 Blake Road, and is located right along Minnehaha Creek, just at the border between Hopkins and St. Louis Park. And this really fits within the Minnehaha Creek Greenway, this overall vision. And just a little bit of background on this, probably most of you are familiar with it, but since 2009, the district has been working with various municipal and private partners in this stretch of Minnehaha Creek that you see highlighted here in this map, on a series of projects really from West 34th Street down to Meadowbrook Lake. And the goals being sort of several goals, water quality goals in downstream water bodies, but also providing some additional recreational access along Minnehaha Creek and in areas that were typically hidden from view with some more industrial land uses. And then obviously sort of working with those partners to either catalyze economic activity or provide other societal benefits. And as those projects started to percolate in 2012, this conceptual design was developed to sort of show, actually these are all connected, and if we kind of focus on them holistically, it really lends itself to this connected greenway. Also, this partnership approach is really what drove the 2014 adoption of the Balanced Urban Ecology. So this project that we're going to be discussing this evening is really sort of the final piece in connecting a series of seamless pedestrian connections from Methodist Hospital all the way up to Cottageville. Especially as we inch closer to completing 325 Blake Road, this small connection is really representing the remaining gap. So it'll be an exciting one to complete and tie it all together finally. Just zooming in a little bit more, I've highlighted in the gold box here the rough project boundary that we're talking about. And then the blue squiggle is actually just tracing Minnehaha Creek, since it's a bit obscured by the vegetation in this picture. As I mentioned, this project will have two parts. There's a trail connection, and then we're also taking this opportunity to look at Minnehaha Creek itself and see if there's any opportunities for either stabilizing the banks or doing some minor work in the stream and in the riparian areas. The trail itself will go underneath the newly constructed Southwest Light Rail corridor. So there's a series of bridges carrying light rail, freight, and the regional trail itself. And our trail connection will be snaking its way underneath, and then ultimately connecting up with the Cedar Lake Regional Trail. There are, you can tell even just from this aerial, there's quite a few project constraints that we're working with. So the creek itself is very much hemmed in on both sides by private property. There's not really any room to re-meander the channel unless, properties were to be removed. So working within the existing conditions that we have, more or less, we'd like to focus on what we are able to do within this footprint. And like I said, that's probably looking at the riparian area and then any opportunities for stabilization or maybe some additional habitat in stream. Similarly, there are constraints for the trail. Part of the trail will likely have to run on private property, just on the south side of the light rail. And we've been in discussions over the years with that owner. And then on the upper side of the corridor, there's also a mix of public and private parcels that we just have to make sure landowners are bought into the project if they're willing to accommodate a trail on part of land that they own, or if we're sort of forced into using the public parcels. Conversations with Met Council started as far back as 2013. So like I said, this project has been conceptualized for quite a while at this point. Those original conversations really were to make sure that any construction on this corridor, when it was completed, would still accommodate this trail connection. And all the parties agreed that probably the best way to do that was, when the original bridges were demolished, was retaining the abutments from the old bridge. And so when they built the new bridge, there's sort of a built-in space for us to run our trail eventually. And that was more or less accomplished through construction.
What do you mean, more or less?
I will get to that in just a moment. And in 2015 and 2016, we also started looking at the Powell Road diversion, and I mentioned that this project takes place right at the border between Hopkins and St. Louis Park. There was also discussions around shifting of municipal boundaries to make some of these projects easier to accomplish. So given all of this work that was happening in the Southwest Light Rail corridor, we had Stantec, at the time Wank, take a look at a really high-level feasibility of running our trail from the preserve underneath the rail corridor into to connect up with the regional trail. We also had our first discussions with the private property owners that we'll be working with to accommodate the trail. As I mentioned, the original work was pretty high level. This is just, this is illustrative. There was 2 alignments that were looked at. Again, this one is showing what it would look like to run the trail on public parcels, which presents some grade challenges and potential expenses with retaining walls. There's another possible alignment that is more closely following the creek, which has some of its own challenges with needing private property buy-in from that. To Manager Miller's question, we're now past this conceptual phase, and this portion of the corridor has been completed and the bridges are in, and we actually, staff conducted a site visit sometime last year, and obviously noticed, there's some changes between what had been planned by the Southwest Light Rail project team and what got built. Notably, lots of very large boulders were placed in the future trail alignment. The abutments still provide the space for the trail, but there'd be significant boulder removal for us to now snake our trail through. This really kind of gets to the heart of doing an updated detailed feasibility study. I'll get to the scope of work in just a minute, but the goal would be looking at conditions on the ground today versus what were in the plan sets back in 2013, 2014, and making sure that any project that we're proposing really accounts for what was built. I think anytime you're doing work in a rail corridor, there's lots of parties involved. It's Met Council, HICRA, there's the freight rails. So having a really solid feasibility study allows us to have conversations with those stakeholders and base our conversations off of the reality on the ground. And we'll be able to propose a project that is truly feasible. As I mentioned, we also, have established and we have ongoing working relationships with all of the private and public partners in this area, but having an updated feasibility study provides sort of a really solid foundation to go from this concept and get some buy-in on a very specific design. So that's sort of project background, which brings us to the scope of work. For an updated feasibility study. And at the height of the technical, the heart of the technical site investigation is really an updated topographic survey. There's 19 parcels that we'd be looking at that would either be accommodating portions of the trail or the riparian area that we'd be looking at. Also, we would be looking at a tree survey and tagging, so making sure that we're not removing trees unnecessarily and sort of understanding what the existing conditions are today versus, the better part of a decade ago. And then also having Stantec do a site walkthrough with staff and sort of go over, the existing conditions with us, and so we sort of understand what is feasible for a future alignment. I've broken out the budget on the right side of the screen here into the two tasks. The first task, as I mentioned, is really the survey work for about $9,000, and the task 2 budget, which I'll detail in just a moment, is coming in just under $16,000. For a total budget of $24,800. Kicking over to task 2, this is where I'll also discuss a little bit of the contingency that we're proposing here. Task 2 is taking all the information we've gathered in task 1 and applying it to those sort of high-level feasibility that was done back in 2015, 2016, and seeing if those alignments that were proposed are still both feasible. The goal here would be eventually to recommend one of those alignments for the trail moving forward. While Stantec is conducting the technical portion of this, district staff would be out meeting with all of the private landowners and City of St. Louis Park, Met Council, and making sure that the final recommendations are not just based on the technical feasibility, but also on the availability of the land for our use. Since we are, we'd like to incorporate to the extent possible improvements to the creek while we're getting in here and not just have this simply be a trail connection project. Stantec has partnered with Interfluve, and they would be a subcontractor looking at opportunities within the channel and on the side of the channel for any sort of habitat enhancement looking at the need for stabilization and those sorts of things. All of this will get pulled together into a technical memo. Again, recommending an alignment for the trail to move forward. Also giving an updated opinion of probable cost. The last time we looked at this project, again, was the better part of a decade ago, and construction on the Southwest Light Rail hadn't been finished yet. We've learned about the placement of these large boulders, which has an expense to remove. Obviously, there's been significant inflation since 2015, 2016. So this feasibility study would give us an updated cost estimate before we get into project design. So we'd be able to put together a much better RFP for design services. The technical work itself can be completed quite quickly, really in a matter of about 2 months to get through this contract. With the tree survey and some of that riparian survey, it's beneficial to get out during the growing season, so they're able to see what the vegetation situation is out there. So we're well positioned to do that over the rest of the summer and into the fall. Some of the overall schedule will be driven more by how quickly we can work with our partners to solidify our agreements and have those discussions. But the feasibility will just improve our ability to have those conversations. In addition to the base budget of $24,800, we're recommending a 10% contingency to this. As I mentioned, it's quite a complex, while short, it's a complex corridor. There's some utility crossings across the stream, several private properties that we'll be traversing and getting shots on, and having about $2,000 or $3,000 extra dollars will allow the surveyors to stay out a little bit longer if necessary to get some additional shots, rather than conducting an incomplete survey and then coming back and having to go back out into the field to get stuff they missed. We'll also be getting on-the-ground shots of the completed bridges, so updated as-built elevations of any structures that were built as part of Southwest Light Rail. And then just kind of giving the board a little bit of a preview on how we would expect this project to progress. This is high level because we still are just kicking off feasibility. We'd be looking this month, after board approval of the scope, to get under contract with Stantec. We are recommending that Stantec is uniquely qualified to do this work based on previous work they did in 2015 and 2016. And they, in addition to the technical work, they've also had lots of conversations with Met Council, City of St. Louis Park, and a number of the private property owners. We think that'll speed along the process as well. As I noted in the memo, we're technically just underneath the dollar amount that would require us to get competitive quotes. But since we are butting up right against that threshold, I just wanted to highlight that for the board, that that is our recommendation. We would get into later this summer and fall, we'd be conducting the feasibility and based on that ordering the project. Over fall and winter of this year, creeping into 2023, we'd be solidifying our partnership agreements. That'd be with the city and Met Council and private landowners. And that would allow us to get into design sometime mid next year. And we'd be anticipating a construction start, if all this stays on schedule, by mid 2024. And based on our understanding, this aligns well with sort of completing our work at 325 Blake, as well as when Southwest Light Rail will eventually be open. So this will allow us to, comfortably have that trail in place as people start to really take advantage of the full Cedar Lake Regional Trail. So with all of that for background, The resolution before the board this evening would be to authorize the district administrator on advice of council to enter into a contract with Stantec Consulting Services to conduct a feasibility study for the Greenway to Cedar Trail Connection and Stream Bank Restoration Project in an amount not to exceed $24,800 with a 10% contingency, and to proceed without seeking additional quotes for this work.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second? Manager Miller seconds. Any questions for Mr. Sherman?
Shouldn't we have Strakota involved in trying to figure out if we have to, you know, what we have to pay to acquire easements or whatever on the private lands?
My sense is that the feasibility study will inform whether or not we need that. So we can we'll have conversations with the property owners and try to get an understanding of, I should note that for the private residential properties, the trail would actually run not next to their yards. They actually own the little bits of land on the other side of the creek. If it seems like from a technical standpoint and that's the direction we want to go, then we would explore what we would need in the way of easements or acquisition.
Manager Olson?
A couple of questions. As the last time we walked it, we went over the railroad tracks. Went up the hill and over and down, because the tunnel was full of water and not really. And the new design would be to have a trail through there with the new tunnels. When you mentioned the big boulders, where are they placed?
So basically there's the new bridges, and if you're walking there, they've kept the abutments of the old bridge, and they're separated by, you know, I'm not sure the number of feet exactly, but enough feet to accommodate the trail connection.
Okay.
The original plans, I believe, had called for leaving that, you know, flat or just dirt so we could run our trail. When we were out there several months ago, large boulders were placed between the new abutment and the abutment that had been retained.
As construction debris, or how
No,
did they
well,
just appear there, or?
They appear to be intentionally placed there. I don't as ballast or as, I guess by the contractor for the bridge work.
And the owner wanted that and requested that of the contractor.
This was based on a visual observation by staff. Those are conversations that we can have with Met Council, you know, finding out what led to that. But that was just based on a visual observation that there are boulders placed there.
I would maybe, when you're talking to them, get their feel on the rail authority too. I wouldn't send our engineer down that rabbit hole. You don't usually get very far. I would run as much of that as you could through them. And they should also have some as-built records for you without having to go shoot those yourself.
So we have been in contact with Met Council, and we are able to, as far as getting out on site and doing this work, they're sort of our sole point agency. And they've been pretty good with, we've had conversation on 325 Blake Road Trailhead. They sort of do a lot of the liaising between the other rail authorities. We are able to, we have construction plans from them. Some of the finishing touches on the whole corridor are not complete, so I don't know that they have completed as-built. That's something that we can.
At some point.
At some point they will.
Right.
We'd like to sort of get, so that we can get our trail work moving on a timeline that allows for it to open similar time to the other, 325 and the Cedar Lake Regional Trail. We have to get out there and do a lot of survey work for the rest of, the areas that aren't underneath that bridge. So while we're out there, it just helps us to ground truth how it was built. But we'll certainly request whatever as-builts are available.
Do you anticipate the flood water, or during flood times, that trail would be inundated, or would that be high enough to be above?
Chris, would you?
Mike's running up.
Okay.
Mr. Hano.
Manager Olson, managers, that is likely dependent upon the flow conditions at the time. The abutments that were left in place were done so to keep the present channel and present flood conditions as they are, but it does exceed the 100-year event.
Okay, so it would be underwater for a period of time and then.
That's correct, and we had conversations early on with Chris and his team as to, what would be the materials that we would be looking at, and this is will all be part of the feasibility well in advance. Is there a way to close? We're worried about, debris or things of that nature when you do have high flows through the area. But it would be very rare. I'd have to look back at the previous technical memo, but it's under very rare conditions that you would have water issues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Manager Miller.
The opposite end of the Greenway, the Methodist Hospital in the Louisiana thing is, it's just a grand public improvement. If we see opportunities here, not just some trail through some woods in somebody's backyard, but some high quality, maybe even remander the creek or whatever. I think we should think the same quality we're thinking at Blake and Lake, and not finish, but the nature portion of it, so that the whole thing doesn't look like it's something that was done by a poor cousin or something. Because both ends are going to be just phenomenal.
You can't make those tracks look good.
What?
You can't make the tracks look good.
No, but it's a nice space out there. I've been through the fence there and looked around, and that backyard that's across the creek, that could be a very peaceful little setting there also. So let's. I'm not telling you to go out and spend money, but go out there and look and see what the potential is.
Manager Loftus.
What did the 2015, 2016 concepts, what were those concepts?
So, Mike and Chris can fill me in if there's anything that I've missed, but essentially, it was a high-level analysis looking at 2 trail alignments.
Okay. And this was one of them?
This was one of them. The other, if you can see where it says Minnehaha Creek here, like I said, the trail would have just followed more closely to the contours of the creek. And that was really to sort of inform those discussions with Met Council and the rail authorities at the time to see if there was the possibility of bringing a trail underneath and then looping back up to the Cedar Lake Trail. So that didn't take a close look at what were the opportunities for any of the in-creek restoration, bank stabilization beyond what would be necessary for the trail itself. So this study would really be looking to take a holistic view and get us to the point where we could solicit for design services based on this work, and then the designers.
Was this the only concept, or were there more?
2.
There was a second one?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was this one and then the one that follows the creek a little bit more closely. So this one you can see outlined in purple.
Yeah, Manager Loftus, if you would imagine it comes under and makes a large swoop up to the trail.
Okay.
So it uses we were looking at a variety of things. This concept here would require a pretty substantial retaining wall.
Okay.
And so there was another concept. Again, it was just a desktop analysis. You can see we used the Kimley-Horn Met Council plans and their topography. So a lot of the contract that we're asking for scope of work tonight is a substantial amount of survey work, because the site out here is quite complicated with utilities as well as with grades, not to mention, of course, the large boulders. So and other challenges. And we should note this: the survey work and stream work is from here all the way down to the Minnehaha
Yeah, you're
Preserve.
going way,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're
Okay.
and that we've already been in communication with St. Louis Park, and they've already agreed that's a substantial. This is a substantial trail connection for them as well. They want to partner. They want to move forward with some cooperative agreement, but they want us to start the process first and foremost, understanding what's going on the site, and then we can work with them to solicit design services.
Manager Miller?
My design would be follow the creek all the way around and have a setting similar to Minnehaha Preserve, rather than some public works blank wall, expensive blank wall. So I stretch your imagination a little bit.
Thank you.
Manager Hajmati?
Is all of this property in St. Louis Park?
Yes, Manager
Okay,
Hajmati,
so
all the
that's why you're
property.
saying you're working with St. Louis Park, okay.
That's
all right,
correct. We've
okay.
crossed the municipal boundary.
Okay.
barely.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
The second question I had was, do you anticipate any difficulties with the property owners? The technical stuff we can always figure out a way around, but sometimes it can get sticky with property owners. Any idea of what we're likely to encounter?
Yeah, Manager Hajmati, managers, we have a memorandum of understanding with the Arnesons, which is the property that has the tightest constraint, which is right here. So we actually have an MOU with this group, or I believe they're brothers that own the site. And they're supportive of the project. We have a very difficult stretch right through here where there's a retaining wall that's holding up their parking lot, and it's right on top of the bank. So when Gabe mentioned we may need to be on private property, but we have a good relationship with them, and we'll continue those conversations. The only other constraint I actually see is the property right here, where their home is actually on the north side of the creek, and they own this little triangle here. There's a strange force main, a double barrel force main sanitary line that's actually elevated. It comes out of the rail corridor across the creek, and they've had issues with kids and other people using that giant pipe to cross or to hang out, and so they're not a huge fan of any additional activity going on back here.
How
But
big
we-
a parcel is that they own?
Probably 1/4 to 3/10 of an acre.
Well, I don't think it'd be a big public relations issue if we condemned it. It's not even
sanitary
connected.
line is that?
It's not even connected to
It must
their
be
property.
at council, I would assume.
Okay.
And so, but they're very friendly, and we've had good conversations with them. We've met them on site. This is, 5-6 years ago. I'm, making those statements assuming the same property owners still own the site. But again, this is what, Chris is familiar with the landowners. It dates back to conversations we had with them. And so those are the two main properties. The large node is actually owned by St. Louis Park. So that was part of the property that was turned back to them from the DNR with the easements along Preserve and some of those other transactions back in the 2010, 2011 timeframe. So once we get through that tight corridor under the rail line itself, the constraints won't be as significant from a property standpoint. It will all be St. Louis Park land.
Did you have a question?
No, I got an answer to that.
Okay. Anything else for Mr. Sherman or Mr. Heeman? All those in favor of adopting the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. It'll be fun to see this come back in other forms. Going to Resolution 22051, Ms. Christopher is presenting.
Good evening, President White and managers. This evening, staff is requesting appointment of the Technical Advisory Committee for the Land and Water Partnership Initiative. And as you may recall, back in December, the board authorized initiation of the stakeholder engagement process for this effort.
which is focused on 2 initiatives to improve integration with land use planning, so the development of a land and water partnership program, as well as the permitting program alignment and rural revision effort. And the purpose really of the engagement effort is to both ensure the successful rollout of these 2 initiatives and also strengthen relationships with our cities and other key partners, and work together to develop an approach for ongoing coordination and improvement of our work together. I'm not sure why some of my text changed font for some reason. Sorry if that's hard to read. In terms of the process, the primary engagement method is establishment of a technical advisory committee. And so in early July, we sent out a kickoff mailing that went to both policymakers and primary staff contacts at our cities, counties, and other local and regional partners that included this publication, introducing the initiative, as well as inviting them to fill out an interest form where they could indicate if and how they wanted to participate, including applying to be a TAC member or recommending a TAC member, requesting an individual meeting, as well as signing up for email updates or expressing interest in stakeholder gathering that's planned for at the tail end of this process. And so with this request, we also set expectations that the TAC would be comprised of staff representatives, again, from the municipalities, counties, soil and water conservation districts, park agencies, and we also provided some of the considerations that we'd be taking into account in selecting members, which included a target size of 15 to 20 members, as well as trying to get broad geographic representation, and also ideally a representation across a variety of roles or departments that we work with. So planners, engineers, water resource staff, public works, kind of all those different types of stakeholders. And so in terms of responses, based on the interest forms that we received, as well as a number of meetings and calls that we've been having as part of the rollout, we heard from 26 staff or consultant representatives that were interested, and these represent 18 of our 29 cities in the district, as well as Hennepin County, Carver Soil and Water Conservation District, Three Rivers, and Met Council. And staff is recommending that all of these interested individuals be appointed, some as alternates, where there was more than one interested person from the same organization. And then we also received interest from 4 policymakers, which I've listed there. So the Mayor of Independence, council members from Woodland and Mound, and then a Watertown supervisor. And so staff has followed up with each of these interested policymakers to explain that the TAC, again, is intended to be a staff work group so that we can be building those staff-to-staff relationships, and also kind of with the expectation that they can advise on how our processes can be better aligned and integrated with city processes in terms of project development and private development review. And again, this is how it was framed in the request, is that it was intended to be a staff work group. And so we have offered individual meetings to those policymakers as an alternative way to discuss the initiative and get their input. And I did just want to note that the Watertown supervisor does remain interested, so I said that I would relay that to the board. But again, my recommendation is that it be a staff work group. And I did just want to show also the geographic representation here on the map. So in green, those are the cities that are recommended to be on the TAC, as well as those other agencies that I mentioned there with the Hennepin County, Carver, SWCD, Three Rivers, and Met Council. So I think with this list, we meet kind of the goals that we set out in terms of a good effective committee size, good representation in terms of geography, as well as a mix of roles across the different agencies. So again, staff is recommending the appointment of the 17 members and 9 alternates that are listed in your packet, and I can take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Christopher. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Manager Maxwell moves. Is there a second?
Hejmati, second.
Manager Hejmati seconds. Any questions for Ms. Christopher? Manager Hajmadi.
Yeah, I noticed that 18 out of the 29 were represented. What about the ones who weren't? How do we handle that?
Sure, yeah, Manager Hajmadi. So, yeah, a lot of the cities that are not on the list are generally kind of the smaller cities that have limited staff capacity, or ones that maybe have just a small portion of the city within the district. And so that was, somewhat expected. It's pretty similar to what we had with the TAC for the watershed management plan. I think we actually had 16 cities there, but it was a very similar list in terms of who participated. And I think, again, we would take a similar approach to what we did there, where all cities are still kept informed, either through, again, sort of individual meetings where there's interest, or through mailings so that everybody's receiving agendas and meeting summaries and can kind of engage as they wish, and certainly through the formal comment period for the rules and things like that, there will be other opportunities. So I think it's, we kind of treated it as an opt-in and try to include as many cities as are able and interested to participate, but there are other ways.
So what I'm hearing is that, they play a pretty small part, so you sort of expected that would happen. But what you're going to do is you're going to outreach them and give them information and find the key people that are to whom to send the information, so that they kept abreast of the process that's going on. They can come in and talk about it if they want, or give them the option of doing that. Good, because I was concerned about them feeling excluded and then causing us trouble later in the future.
Right.
There was concerns I had another question, which was that I noticed that the policymakers, there were some policymakers who wanted to come in. Wherever they were from, were technical representatives from from either the city or the county or whatever, from which these policymakers came, or was it? I want to be sure that they're represented.
Right.
So.
2 yes and 2 no. So, so for Woodland and Mound, they're both being represented by a consultant engineer with Bolton and Mink. Watertown Township is not. They have a clerk, I think, but don't otherwise have staff, and they only have about, I think it's 0.2 square miles within the district, so pretty limited interaction that we typically have there. But yeah, I think they just wouldn't have the capacity sort of on staff or the consultant relationship to participate. And then Independence was the other, and there again, we've reached out to their city planner and administrator to, so they're aware of the process, and I think they didn't opt in for this, probably based on capacity considerations, but we have, had close conversations with the mayor, and I think, he was comfortable with, I think he was trying to show support by applying, but I think is very comfortable with what we're proposing in the process that we're running, and I think we've, got a good connection and good relationship there that we can keep them informed and feel part of the process.
One of the things that happens with policymakers, especially if they're council members and so on, is that they end their terms and somebody else gets elected and so on. I presume we'll keep track of that kind of stuff so that we don't lose them. Because when there's a transition from one to the other, there's obviously a shift.
Right.
Do you have some thoughts and ideas on that?
So in terms of connections we're making right now with current policymakers and whether
right now you've got a good relationship with someone that person might leave and somebody else might come,
right,
who doesn't have technical skills and who is, objects and creates problems later. So is there some way to manage that?
Yeah, I think I think that is why we're putting a lot of emphasis on building the staff relationships too, because I think there's ideally not as much turnover there at that level.
Right.
And so I think we have, like I said, have that pretty well in hand across most of the cities. And so for those few that we aren't participating, like I said, we're trying to find ways to pull them in, and can continue to think about kind of other touch points that we might want to plan for kind of as this process proceeds. And if some maybe even want to opt in later, I know we did that with the watershed management plan by adding a couple on kind of
Oh,
while we were
you
midstream.
did pull them in later, okay.
Right,
Right.
but otherwise, yeah, we look to mainly handle that through, like I said, kind of continuing to share the information, offering meetings, and kind of working together, like I said, through the conversations with the TAC to figure out what's the best way to kind of maintain these connections and relationships long-term in a way that's, sustainable and workable for us, so we're not, running around constantly, kind of making the rounds to all 29 communities, but figuring out kind of the right touch points at the right, on a routine enough basis that everybody's feeling connected.
Okay. And now my question goes the other way, and James, you may have to answer this, which is the policymakers, who are part of the, to whom these staff report to, are we going to maintain connections with them? Because that, long term, that's one of the things we've talked about, is maintaining relations with policymakers. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Manager Hejmati. I think early on, as Becky and the team framed this particular process with the board, we did have an explicit conversation around, is the work that we're undertaking warranting an ask of the time of policymakers to engage in a policy advisory committee? And where we landed is, this is fulfilling a commitment that we made in our watershed management plan to provide an opportunity for communities to get into our capital improvement plan, our responsive or now land and water partnership program. And that had heavy policymaker engagement. And so in a lot of ways, we're selling apple pie, and the folks that are going to be generating projects that come into the CIP are park staff, public works staff, community development staff. And so that's really been why we're focused at a technical advisory committee level. That said, we put a premium on making sure that we maintain connection and relationships as an organization with the policymakers. And so we're constantly keeping tabs on, the key connections that we have in every community and making sure that we have open lines of communication. So leading up to this process and the appointment of the TAC, Becky and I have done a soft rollout essentially. So before any of the publications hit mailbox of City Council, we've had key connections, whether it's with Mayor of Independence, Carver County, we're hitting the city of Edina on August 16th with Minneapolis, St. Louis Park, or staff in key leadership positions to explicitly make sure they understand we're sending this information to your policymakers. We want to maintain open lines of communication. We will custom tailor our communication to your needs. We will come to the full city council and have a meeting. We'll take one-on-ones. We'll come have a work session with a council member and a staff member. That's something that we discussed with, I think, President White and Manager Loftus as some of our key liaisons to the Lake Minnetonka area, where we have a lot of the smaller member communities that outsource their connection to us through consulting engineers. So I feel like my sense is we have a pretty tight read on the relationships that we have with all of the communities, and are in a good space there to not be surprising anybody. And then plus the bones or the guts of the policies that we're developing are really geared towards providing value-added service to the cities too. It's nothing that's controversial. Finally, we have talked about as staff, and I think talked about as a refresher for the board, that as we work through this process, probably before final adoption of the rules or anything like that, that we would have, and this might be Q2 of 2023, a gathering or a summit where we invite the policymakers to more of an open house, where instead of it just being about the nitty-gritty of this policy, it's a celebration of everything that we've accomplished with their help, an update on we're going to be implementing these policies that you've helped us shape, a big thank you for all of the things that we've accomplished, and then starting to chart a course for where we're going with the 2027 plan. And so that's sort of our mid 10-year plan cycle way of connecting with all of our communities and expressing thanks and celebrating their accomplishments with all the water resource improvements we built together, giving them an update on these policies, and then setting the goalposts for the next 5 years. So I think we've had touch points on the front end that were the right ones. And we've programmed other touch points in a real, I think, intentional way with the policymakers through this process. And where we haven't had direct policymaker connection, we have a very solid understanding with city leadership that this information's been relayed. And all of the publications have hit every council member's in the district's mailbox. So at a minimum, we took care of that ourselves and make sure everybody was informed. So my sense is we're in really good shape, but I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, I just want to get a sense of how you handle it. It sounds very thorough and very well planned.
Yeah, I mean, we learned a lot of lessons the first time we did rule revisions, and we carried those forward into how we did, where we spent a lot of time on the back end doing retroactive communications to catch people up and explain, because the message never passed through the staff filter to policymakers, and that permanently informed a change in approach that we carried through our 2017 plan, and is something that we've been very intentional about with, just with any level of engagement, whether it's a select project, but this is more of a programmatic effort that touches all 29 communities, our counties, legislators, everybody. So I feel like we've really done a great job making the rounds, stopping short of hitting every single city council meeting and being eyeball to eyeball. So I think we have a good read on the relationships out there. And I would say that all the feedback that we've heard through the soft rollout is we like what Minnehaha Creek Watershed District's doing, and we understand even with new or interim staff, city managers, leadership, we like the direction that you're going with these policies. So I think we have a good level set.
Thank you, Mr. Whisker. Manager Miller?
I think Manager Maxwell would agree with me that most elected officials wouldn't have the time to invest in a technical committee like this.
No, I really like the part that it's staff-driven. I think we're going to get a lot more accomplished doing that than getting other people involved that also have a certain agenda or something like that. So we're better off with just staff-driven.
Well, I think the key is on a context-specific basis, we are putting ourselves in front of decision makers. We did it with Carver County. We're doing it with the Edina. We're doing it with Minneapolis. So everybody knows what we're up to and isn't going to be surprised. And if they are, we'll be surprised.
Yeah. And this is a lot of communities and a lot of people. That's a tremendous amount of work to maintain that kind of connection. I'm just thinking of the amount of work that our staff has to do on this, including other things that they're doing. So, is our staff, is there enough time to do all this stuff?
I'm a big believer in the infinite potential of humans, Arun.
Well, and I think,
I'm trusting that you do.
well, I think that is why we specifically made that one of the topics for discussion with the TAC, is like, how do we do this effectively and efficiently across all of these partners?
That will be an outcome of this process on the tail end, is what is the program for cementing these connections in perpetuity and getting the feedback from the stakeholders? Because what we've learned over time is every community is different.
Yeah.
City of St. Louis Park does not need or want us in front of council. They have too much other stuff going on.
Yeah.
But we have such open and porous lines of communication with every part of the city, it's not an issue. And some of the smaller communities are consulting this out, so it really takes sort of a patchwork approach.
Right, that's what it sounds like. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from Ms. Christopher? All those in favor of adopting the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you. Now we'll go to 11.4, which is the minutes from the July 28th meeting. I'd like to have a motion to get this on the table, then we can talk about any changes and move to amend after that. So is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
Won't rule.
Thank you. And is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Manager Loftus. Manager Miller, why don't you start?
I haven't got the minutes in front of me, but my proposal was to, and it was adopted by the board, is that there be a segment on the end of the agenda for board inquiries, issues and ideas that be gathered, but not discussed at the meeting and referred by the president to the appropriate committee for them to take up if they desire. It'd be just something that a board member wants more information about or wants a discussion about or whatever. In the minutes reflected that it would be considered by the president to refer, but it was the president would refer without discussion. And the committee would decide whether they want to discuss it or not.
The other change is that there's some legacy language there. Manager Olson did not convene and adjourn. I did. But is there any other?
That was a previous meeting.
Yeah. Got carried forward. Mr. Smith.
Madam President, while we're catching up these minutes, I would like to go to the previous section where I presented the Circle Pines decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just like to add the language that it says a manager seeking appointment or reappointment as well advised to seek a nomination. I'd like to suggest inserting the words at least 60 days before the term expires.
Mm-hmm.
So that in our minutes and everyone will be clear there's that 60-day clause.
Okay.
And the terms expire when?
March 7th, something like that.
But 60 days is the deadline. If you wait if you're at day 59,
Before the term expires, it's too late.
it's too late. So it's 60 days or longer.
Yeah, and you
At
said
least 60
at
days.
least, yeah.
Yeah.
So with those 4 changes, there a motion to amend the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Manager Maxwell. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Miller, thank you. All those in favor of adopting the amendment, motion to amend, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And all those in favor of adopting the minutes as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next is the item Manager Miller mentioned, board inquiries, issues, or ideas. Is there a
Yeah, I have some. Are you ready? Better get some more paper.
uh-oh.
No, what I would like to have done is bring up the wetland study and have a staff presentation to the appropriate committee. This study was an extensive, comprehensive study of all the wetlands in the district, prioritize them and what value they have. And it's very informative. And I think the wetlands represent one of the biggest assets for the district. So I think it'd be important for all the board members to have access to that and have a good explanation of the study.
That was called the functional assessment of wetlands. I think I've
What
heard
was
that
it called?
referred to. Yeah. Okay. Any other suggestions?
Well, as long as we're at it,
I shouldn't have said that thing about him.
I was just looking through some old documents that I said on here, and it was a very well thought out presentation by the district administrator on the district administrator's transition, and it was worked on for several months by a subcommittee, and it would be good just to review that, and not as a review of the administrator's activity, but just where we've come and where are we on this far-reaching objective that we put out in 2018. And I don't know if I'd like to have that referred also, but with no time frame, because I think it'd take some time for everybody to review it and have a sense of what we were trying to accomplish and see where we are.
I have noted those 2 items. Anything else? Then we'll go to the administrator's report. Mr. Whisker, you're up.
Thank you, President White. Top of my list is I'm going to be brushing up on the functional assessment of wetlands. It rained a little bit. We got some precipitation. We got between an inch, I think, around Long Lake and an inch and a half down at MSP. And we've seen some moderate change in water level, but not much. So Lake Minnetonka is at 928.4, just a foot below ordinary high and still below runout. So the dam remains closed, no flow in the creek. Shifting gears here to some board connections on the website. One of the things that we want to make sure is prominent on the website are headshots, bios for our team, and the board's a key part of the team. So that's something that we're going to be updating, and you should anticipate seeing an email in your inbox from our outreach team to both alert you to when we're scheduling those pictures so that you can make sure you wear your Sunday best. And then there's going to be 2 ways in which we can get your biographical information. I think that this is going to be really important because we have such a diversity of background and expertise on our board, and I think that that's useful information for the public. So there's going to be a way to do that online through form, or you can set up a time with staff, and we have some, interview questions, and we'll kind of tease out the experience that will make its way into your bios. I think we may end up pushing to September, but at the earliest, the photos could be scheduled right before or around the next board meeting, which is, as a reminder, is on Monday, August 22nd, scheduled around the Mod Summer Tour, which I know some of you are attending. Mike and Gabe already stole thunder and took all the credit for the environmental response funds that we got from Hennepin County, $287,000. So we talked about it on committee, but we'll get it on the record. And then I think as a related note, we were informed this week that Alatus also received another additional tranche of grant funds from Hennepin County, $275,000 for transit-oriented development, and that's to help them with vegetation and landscaping for the stormwater cascade flowing through the site. So the county continues to be a strong partner with 325 Blake Road, continuing to contribute grant funds into the critical redevelopment. We'll jump over to the city